Working a job can really suck. Your coworkers are incompetent, the hours are long, you never really get to take a vacation, and worst of all, everyone you work with is trying to drink your blood. Okay, maybe this isn't everyone's experience, but tonight's story is all about it.
Feel the chill in the air. Listen to the leaves rustle as they die and fall to the ground. It is Halloween. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Join me for a tale of Halloween. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It's Saturday, but it's October, it's spooky season, and I'm here to bring you even more spooky in your weekly. I'm your host and narrator, Enrique Couto, and so many of you have chosen to spend your spooky season with me, and I can't say just how happy it's made me. So thank you for joining me yet again. We're almost to the end of this year's season, but don't worry, there's plenty more coming. Tomorrow we'll have a collection of Edgar Allan Poe stories read by yours truly to enjoy, and Monday is a very special episode of Monthly Spooky you won't want to miss, and of course Tuesday is our traditional Halloween episode, and it'll mark 4 years of Weekly Spooky. So I hope to see you there, and if you need even more content somehow after all that we've put out this month, why not check out the television series I produced and directed with many of my collaborators here at Weekly Spooky. That's right, a television series. You can watch it at Tubi TV for completely free. Head over to Tubi TV and type in Found Footage, the series. I promise you, it won't disappoint. You'll have a great time watching it. It's the perfect thing to watch while you unwind after handing out candy to your trick-or-treaters. That's Found Footage, the series, at Tubi TV on your smart television or Roku box. Check it out today. Now, before we get to this very scary, very fun, very bloody story, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for making this the most successful month in Weekly Spooky's nearly 4-year history. It's really meant a lot to me and our authors to know so many of you are enjoying their content. But remember, we're not going anywhere. When October ends, we stick around every week with a little taste of Halloween, so make sure you're subscribed. But now, it's time for the story after these quick words. Caroline Quinn, Vampire Hunter, by Mike Ashkewe. Halloween always brings out the weird ones. Can you remember a time when it didn't bring out the weird ones? I can't. Now, toss in all sorts of things people consider fantastic and impossible only 50 years ago, and now it's only weirder. It's also a lot more dangerous. See, 50 years ago, something happened and no one can explain it. People just were born different. Different how? Well, suddenly, people could fly, people could turn invisible, and sometimes those special people had bad days, and people ended up dead. Now, toss in the fact that some things we considered myth and legend were also real. Real-life monsters, vampires, werewolves, shapeshifters, and stuff that would make Stephen King say, "What in the actual fuck?" It's a real shit show, but it's home, and frankly, it's a living. I deal with problems that the usual police or even gifted individuals can't. My name is Caroline Quinn, and I'm something a little different than what you might expect. I'm not a super, and I'm not a cop, but something in between those things. I don't report to anyone per se, but I do draw a paycheck. I'm what's known as a troubleshooter. I am contracted by the government to deal with, quote, issues that require discretion and, most importantly, plausible deniability. See, it's okay to have your local neighborhood asshole in a cape deal with some lunatic who can level a building with a punch, but sometimes you deal with something different. Again, you know how I mentioned that whole creatures of myth and legend? Well, those same things cause trouble, and your average person isn't equipped to deal with the truly paranormal. People can accept superpowers, but you start bringing in the undead and all that shit, well, let's say they don't deal with it well at all. Suddenly, what goes bump in the night is real and makes Freddy Krueger look tame in comparison. Governments try very hard to suppress a lot of the truly scary shit, but sometimes it gets out. Thanks to Instagram, I'm sure we needed to see one of America's top superheroes get torn apart by vampires or a group of teenagers get pulled under the water by an ancient shark god near New Zealand. You might ask, why try to hide it? We have literal superheroes. Well, something happened and those things are becoming more frequent, almost like a natural response to the rise of the gifted. It's almost like undeath finds a way. I'm sure there is a philosophical or religious explanation or maybe even scientific reason behind it, but if there is, I don't know it, and I don't care to know it. I get paid to deal with it. How do I deal with it? I'm tough, supernaturally tough. Even by the standards set by the gifted community, I'm an anomaly. There aren't many like me, and that is probably a good thing. I've heard more than a few whispered conversations worrying about what she and her kind represent. In short, they think I'm a threat. I'm also something that seems to be somewhere between them and the gifted. They believe, however, better to have that threat under control and on your side. A fucking cocktail of supernatural and superpowered. Did I mention I get some perks from this gig? I get 2 weeks of paid vacation a year, which can be revoked at any time, should the situation dictate. Isn't that just swell? I got to go to Disney World once, till some undead goon tried to kill some kid in a Mickey Mouse costume. I got a free pair of mouse ears for my trouble. So where does that bring us now? A few days ago, I got a tip that led to a small town in rural upstate New York. Your quiet little sleepy town that has a Denny's, a big box retailer, and people get excited when Starbucks comes to town. The information was compiled by a computer forensic person I knew in the FBI who had an eye for this sort of thing. Her name was Rianne, and she was also my ex-girlfriend. Aren't workplace romances complicated? Still, she and I were good till we weren't. The information dealt with a very strange set of deaths that had occurred over the last few months in the local old age communities. A lot of dead old-timers and not passing away from natural causes either. Normally, this would have just slid under the radar and been filed away under so sad, too bad. But I guess some intern did some blood workup and it got sent to the wrong lab, and that got Rianne's attention. Certainly makes my job easier than having to rely on AI and search algorithms. I still don't trust computers and probably never will. I had to be dragged out of using a flip phone in the last 10 years. I stopped for breakfast before driving into Hope Springs. I traveled in a little camper van, and while it wasn't the most glamorous, it wasn't a half-bad place to sleep and even had a mini refrigerator and solar panels. It wasn't Howard Johnson, but it was home for most of the year. Sitting down and eating an overpriced plate of bacon and eggs, I started to look over the files. Rianne always did me a solid and compiled it into easy-to-understand pieces, and compartmentalization was her specialty. For about 4 months, 20 or so unusual deaths were recorded in the city's coroner's report, and all of them had an unusual marker in the blood work. One of the recently deceased had a busybody of a son who demanded to know what happened to dear old dad and demanded a full autopsy, and evidently had the pull to make it happen despite a coroner who could not have cared less. The son probably wanted some kind of an insurance payout or something equally as heartless. Isn't family great? Sipping at my disgusting black liquid allegedly called coffee, something stood out to me. That unusual marker in the blood work was some kind of thing I'd seen before. Without getting all technical and probably losing your interest, it was a foreign element, and it didn't belong in the body of an 89-year-old man. It was gifted blood and contained trace elements of what has been widely identified as vampiric blood. I stopped eating and kept reading the files over and over again. Over the course of 4 months and 20 bodies, this particular blood pattern occurred over 10 times. Someone or something was preying on the elderly and was using them to feed, but not turning them into more of them. Normally, a vampire would create a little army, and we'd have a small problem on our hands. Some of the more unique gifted heroes like Photonic or Ultraviolet would be asked to help. However, recently, after almost dying themselves, they were reluctant or flat out refused to assist. Usually, superior firepower with silver and UV grenades would do the job, but you could always count on one of the slippery undead fucks getting away like some kind of Houdini and Dracula combined. This one was greedy and didn't want to share eating with the old folks. This one also was different and maybe was working with a gifted person to incapacitate the geezers or something else entirely. Maybe they were like me and had a mix of both worlds in their blood. Either scenario means I wouldn't be out of here by Monday, and with Halloween happening in a day, it meant a lot of potential collateral damage with civilians nearby. Great. Now I have to hunt down a potentially superpowered vampire or a regular vampire with a super sidekick. You know, working at Applebee's certainly sounds a lot less dangerous right now. I'd at least make tips and not have to worry about half my guts decorating the walls or having my soul sucked out. Remember, 2 weeks paid vacation plus 401k plus blah blah protect your country and save humanity blah blah. Right. I can practically recite the recruiting speech. Just have to hold up my end of the bargain and make sure supervillains or Satan doesn't destroy the planet first. Fuck. They could have called people like Megaton or FaZe, but no. My name comes up first in the Rolodex. Do people still use those? Rolodexes? I finish my breakfast and leave a few bucks on the table. I throw a wry look at my waitress as if saying, I'm sorry I'm gonna fuck up your town in a few days, but hey, have $10. I exit the diner and start heading back to my camper van. It's cold in late October and my leather jacket isn't quite as warm as I would like. It's at least pretty out here in that quaint kind of way. Hope Spring is about another 20 miles away, and I have nothing but my thoughts and a playlist of Megadeth and other 80s hair metal. What can I say? It sets the mood for killing vampires and probably looking sexy while doing it. I won't look sexy while doing it because no one is ever going to know I did it, and if it ends up on Reddit with my face, then I'll have a lot of explaining to do, and probably no 401k to look forward to. Maybe I'll write a book after I retire. I could do a podcast. Any asshole with a microphone has one of those these days anyway, right? Hit the road and it's a long 20 miles with only trees, farmhouses, and the occasional cow or horse outside grazing. There is boring and then there is boring. It's an easy drive though, and besides picking up a cherry Slurpee on the way, it's uneventful too. Entering the city limits and I immediately feel like I've entered a Charlie Brown Halloween special. This place has gone absolutely all out on the season. There are pumpkins and scarecrows and all sorts of window displays. I'm pretty sure I saw a life-size Pennywise the Clown welcoming me into the jewel of upstate New York. Well, I'm sure this is tax dollars well spent. Rianne had arranged a visit for me to examine the latest victim before they were sent off to the funeral home. Oh joy, cadaver fresh, just like Mom used to make. You know what I like about dead people? They're easy to get along with. They're quiet, and they always listen. Wait, no, I take that back. Most of the dead people I deal with are supernaturally strong, fast, and probably have lived a few centuries and have razor-sharp fangs and claws. I did, however, kill one Scottish vampire with an accent so thick I couldn't stop laughing when he threatened me. It was like killing a blood-sucking version of Shrek. Wasn't so bad once I unloaded one of the vampire-killing shotguns into him. Still, you haven't lived until you fought Vampire Shrek. I still giggle about that one even though he dislocated my shoulder. That's the one thing I didn't expect. I thought I was invincible, or at least damned close to it. For some strange reason, things like them can hurt me. Anything unnatural, not human. I've been put in the hospital a few times and even had a few close calls I don't like to remember. It's likely the only thing that puts me in the ground. I'd still not want to take one of the phase's energy discharges to the face just to be sure. I'm too damn pretty to die like that. Driving around town, and it's like I was in a weird cross between Halloween Town and the wet dream of a Spirit Halloween executive. I eventually found the coroner's office tucked away near a cute little Dutch bakery and a Mennonite furniture store. Pulled up the van to the building's parking lot and grabbed my gear bag and my federal ID and my shoulder holster for my sidearm. I had the absolute worst hair day when they took that photo too. They didn't seem too thrilled when I wanted to give finger guns either. No one has a sense of humor these days.
Don't go away. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Anyway, I made my way up to the door and hit the buzzer. A couple of minutes passed before a bored-looking black gentleman approached the glass door. I'm assuming this was the coroner for Hope Springs, Percy Downer. He kinda looked like the guy from the John Wick movies and had this quiet confidence about him, but he didn't look too happy to see me when he saw the ID badge on my breast pocket. "Mr. Downer," I smiled and said through the glass door. "Yes, and you are?" He didn't return my warmth. It was gonna be one of those days, wasn't it? "Special Agent Caroline Quinn, Federal Bureau of Investigation. My field office should have called ahead." They better have called ahead, or this was going to be a fun time fast-talking Mr. Personality over here. They did. Seems like a bit unusual to send an FBI agent out here to examine what is clearly a heart attack. I smiled back at him and even tried to straighten out my breasts and try my womanly wiles on him. Please work. I just want to examine the body, confirm my suspicions, and actively begin my investigation and get back on the road. Well, I just go where Washington tells me to go. I don't imagine it'll be anything too involved. I mean, if you wanted to take off and grab lunch, I don't think I'll be longer than an hour. He frowned when I said take off for lunch. This was the kind of guy who liked his workspace and didn't appreciate outsiders interfering in his little corner. "Look, Agent Quinn, there isn't anything to see here. Mr. Carey's son has already had me do the initial autopsy, and I found nothing out of the ordinary." I'm starting to lose my patience and any potential head start. I'm relatively sure that the bloodsucker doesn't know I'm in town yet. I'm also not wearing a giant neon sign that says Vampire Killer either, so I probably have the element of surprise so far. "Mr. Downer, if you want me to call the field office and make this a whole thing, I can do that, but I'd really rather not. So why don't we just let each other get out of each other's way and let me do my job? Let me make it interesting to you. Why don't you go out to lunch on Uncle Sam's tab and invoice the field office on my authorization? Just don't break the bank, okay?" His demeanor changed when I said, "Charge it to the government." I probably won't get into too much trouble. I mean, how much could the guy realistically eat and drink? "Why don't you take your lab intern with you? I think her name is Michelle, right? Go out, have a great lunch and a few drinks, and I'll call you when it's time to come back and lock up." "Fine. I'll get Ms. Crawford and we'll be down at Hitch Steakhouse. You have my number?" I nodded. I think he could tell I just wanted to get this over with as quickly as I could. He opened the door and led me to the mortuary and his lockers all sealed up tight. Downer gestured toward a series of slabs near the middle row and said, I'd find my guest in locker 3. I noticed there was a lot of blood on the examination tables, and some looked fairly fresh. The Bureau thanks you for your assistance and cooperation in this matter. Agent Quinn, please do not disturb the lower row. Those ladies came in this morning and I haven't had a chance to properly do anything with them. They didn't come in a very pleasant or complete manner. Gross. I waited a few minutes while Downer and his assistant left the morgue and I was alone with my new friends. All right, let's get to work and see what we got here. I slide open the drawer where my first guest of honor is supposed to be. According to what Rianne sent me, this was Phil Carey, age 89. His naked body was stark white as most corpses are, and it would have been nothing out of the ordinary except if you knew what to look for. A lot of newer vampires took blood from unusual places, and this one was no different. There was a small set of puncture wounds behind his right knee. It was pretty easy to miss due to the scar tissue back there, suggesting he'd probably had knee surgery or some kind of an injury when he was younger. I kept looking over the body with my examination gloves and gently turning over the old man, well, as gently as I could. Old guy wasn't exactly heavy, but for some reason, I was having a hard time moving him. The body seemed not as stiff as I was expecting either, almost like rigor mortis hadn't totally set in. What in the fuck? I turned away for a second to grab my phone and maybe call Rianne and see what else was pulled up in that lab report that I missed. This guy shouldn't be this, fresh. This is so weird. No sooner did I think that than something absolutely unearthly split the room with a ear-shattering howl. The sound vibrated off of every surface and seemed to rattle my eardrums in my head, and I couldn't get my bearings for a second as it was like someone set off a flashbang right next to my face. The body of Phil Carey sat straight up on the slab and looked right at me. I froze for a second. I'd never seen a new vampire animate before. The old man looked confused as the scream emitted from his cracked, cold lips. He looked wildly around the room and locked onto me in terror, panic, and something else I can't describe. Did he want help? "What did you do to me?" the man screamed. I reached into my jacket and tried unlatching my sidearm, a specialty 9mm pistol with silver bullets. Okay, it's game time. The old man looked down at the Y incision in his chest, and he started screaming again, and this time there was pain, rage, and sadness. As he cried out, I held my ground. His body started to change and morph into his new unlife. Soon Mr. Carey would have enhanced strength, armor like skin, and even wings if he wanted. His fingernails grew into nasty-looking claws, and he started cutting into his own chest and started pulling out his own guts through the fresh incision on his chest. "What the fuck are you doing?" I blurted out as I leveled my weapon at his head. He kept screaming and started pulling his chest open, and eventually his entrails were everywhere, but he still was alive, I guess. Blood and viscera and everything that was inside was now on the outside. I steeled myself and pulled the trigger. 1, 2, 3. I put 3 rounds into his head and he stopped screaming after his head exploded like a watermelon filled with firecrackers. The body fell off the examination table and into a pile of blood, gore, and what was left of his head. I put another 2 rounds into his heart, just to be sure. Always double tap the heart or completely incinerate the torso. Usually you take out the head and the heart and it'll stop him. Usually. Okay, never seen that before. That was new and fucking terrifying. I stop for a second and look around the carnage, and it's one of the worst places I've ever been to. I was at the Vampire Nest in 2018 in Boston, and that was messed up and even the supers won't talk about it. Blood, gore, and missing limbs, dead agents. That was the day that Nightshade lost her eyes when the vampire lord stuck his claws into her face. That's a sound you never forget. One of the worst days we ever suffered as a task force. But we won. I guess. 30 of us, including a few supers, went in. Only 7 of us came back out alive. or close enough to not be considered a casualty. I start to catch my breath and I can hear banging and muffled screams coming from inside the freezers. You've got to be fucking shitting me. There's more of these things? I'm in a goddamn nest with no backup and not nearly enough ammo on me to do the job. All my specialty stuff is in the van and locked up. I'm tough, but I'm not invincible, and I'm certainly not equipped to deal with this by myself. Time to go. Downer had said the new bodies didn't come in intact. I can use that to my advantage. If they reanimate without all their limbs, then maybe I wouldn't be dealing with the golden ghouls at full power. Okay, grannies, I have an idea. Hold that thought. I'll be right back. I ran into the morgue and then right outside into the now pouring rain and straight into my van, tossing open the doors and into the secured compartment by my tiny fridge. They say that happiness is a warm gun, and in this particular instance, happiness and security was delivered by a top-of-the-line paranormal defense contractor and an alleged coven of witches from Salem. All right, motherfuckers. I grabbed Sweet Baby Jane, my custom automatic 12-gauge shotgun with a carbon fiber finish with pink highlights and a laser sight. Buckshot with silver and some other stuff that I don't totally understand, but all I know, it turns the undead into Swiss cheese. All I know right now is that Baby Jane is hungry. The big surprise, though, doesn't so much go boom as it goes pop. The real piece of hardware I came for. Ultraviolet grenades. Those same DoD eggheads developed a way to deliver a concentrated blast of ultraviolet energy in a small package no bigger than a pack of smokes. These things could really fuck up a bloodsucker's day if you could get them in an enclosed area and you didn't mind risking the chance of going blind and maybe contracting cancer. Walk back inside the mortuary and I can hear the banging of the undead against the steel coolers and the occasional confused yelp. I slide around into the shotgun's chamber and make my way back into the examination room. Move forward slowly, cautiously, and be ready to unload hell into whatever face decides to come up and say hello. Good news is that they don't know how to break the seal on the lockers, and for now, I have the element of surprise. Creeping up the first locker, I can hear whatever is inside just absolutely freaking out. As much as a part of me is afraid on some level for getting my throat ripped out by B. Arthur here, there is a bit of a sadistic joy crawling through my body. I sling the shotgun at my side and grip one of the small black UV grenades and inch my way towards the cooler. Trick or treat, I say as I open the door and quickly pull the pin and throw the small device inside and seal the door once again. An audible voice exclaims, "What?" A second later, a brilliant flash and the satisfying thump of a contained detonation within a confined space are music to my ears. That's 2 dead vampires, and it's not even lunchtime yet. You could call this a kill streak, couldn't you? Not bad, but no time to get sloppy. The screeching sound of steel being torn from its moorings fills the room as the second undead grandma makes her way out of her makeshift tomb. The steel door flies off across the room and embeds itself in the wall by the entrance. Downer isn't going to be happy with what I did to his workspace. In my defense, they started it. The blood at least adds some color, so there's that. The creature started clawing its way out of the locker, and its twisted, aged face emerged with a furious rage, and it locked eyes with me. Normally, this would be absolutely terrifying to come face to face with an undead vampiric horror, but when it's an undead vampiric horror of a bingo lady in her late 70s, it loses a little bit of the fear factor. She was still a threat to me due to her newly unleashed strength and speed and toughness, but if I'm lucky, she'd be like a baby elephant learning how to walk for the first time and be clumsy. Fortunately, she hadn't been undressed yet, so I didn't have to witness something that could have seared my eyes out. The creature fell out of the locker and onto the cold floor and started to transform into her new unlife before my very eyes. Bones snapped into new places. A pair of thin, bony wings started to form and unfurl from her back and tear from her little blue nightgown, and finally, her skin started to take on an ashen gray shade as it solidified into an armor-like hide. I've never seen a new vampire gain so many of its new abilities so quickly after reanimating. This was something new, and this was definitely something I wasn't quite expecting so early on a Friday morning. The grenades wouldn't do a lot since the space was too open unless I landed it right on her shoulder, so that was out for the time being. Immediately, without really thinking about it, I had baby Jane back in my arms and ready to unleash hell upon this fiend. The old lady unfurled her new wings and stretched them out and knocked over several tables of supplies. She looked amazed at her new body and didn't seem too fazed that she was now among the planet's paranormal population. I aimed the shotgun at her and immediately its green laser engaged and painted a picture on the center of her mass. She didn't seem to take notice of the 6-foot blonde federal agent aiming a fully automatic shotgun at her. She extended her arms forward and started looking at her new hands, which had now formed into wicked long sickle-like claws. I racked the slide and made sure that it was ready to sing that 12-gauge buckshot show tune. As soon as the slide clicked, the creature's eyes immediately narrowed and focused on me. We both held tense at the standoff here in the Hope Springs morgue, and not one made a move or sound. The only sound we could both hear was an ancient wall clock that was suspended above the lockers, and it was clicking up towards noon. 11:59. The second hand was swinging around towards the bottom, and the last 30 seconds of the morning was counting down. The old lady opened her mouth with her new fangs and drooled as she smiled at me. I smiled back at her, part of it to relieve the tension I was feeling in my own body, and part of it was hoping it would unnerve her a touch as to why I was being so confident. She didn't seem fazed by my bravado or the shotgun. 20 seconds left. She took a step towards me and tore off what remained of her blue nightgown and growled at me. I stood my ground. "Are you prepared to die, young lady?" I grinned and tightened my grip, and slowly prepared to squeeze the trigger on my weapon. "Not today." 15 seconds. She took another step towards me, and now less than 10 feet separated us, and I swear she grew another 2 feet in height as she took that single stride. 10 seconds. Wait for it, I thought. She leapt at me with a supernatural speed and swiftness and threw her entire body forward and her claws reaching for me. Showtime as the clock struck noon. Part of my abilities besides being tough is that I'm also as quick as most of the night creatures themselves, if I can judge things right. This time my luck paid off, as I suspected it would. I twisted my body at the last second and let her fly right past me and crash into the workstation behind. As the old woman flew past and crashed into the equipment as well, I fired off a few rounds from the shotgun. 2 quick succession blasts erupted from the weapon and shredded her new wings into confetti. These particular shotgun rounds were particularly nasty too, as those said defense contractors decided to pack something a little extra besides the magic-adjacent mojo into them: magnesium pellets and silver and enchanted pellet shards. Dragon's breath shotgun shells with a little bit extra. The rounds lit her up and she was doused in flames as well. The monster yelped in pain and surprise, as her armored hide didn't have an answer to that little one. It didn't seem to slow her down much as she quickly got to her feet for yet another attack. This time I wasn't so quick, and I got the full force of this creature barreling into me with tremendous and unexpected force. The blow knocked the wind out of me and sent my weapon from my hands across the room and under an examination table. I was knocked against a steel table and left gasping for air. The old woman delivered another sucker punch into my gut, and I doubled over in pain and was left gasping for air. I'm in trouble here, guys.
More scares to come. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
The monster grabbed a hold of my head and started raising it up to her face directly. Her grip was powerful and would not be easily broken. I said, "Are you prepared to die?" She hissed at me through her fangs. She started squeezing my head and I could feel things start to go black and my consciousness start to fade. She was going to knock me out before she likely tore me apart. limb from limb. This old bitch isn't exactly playing fair. Well, I don't have to play fair either. I thrust my arms up between hers and tried to force them apart from squeezing me further. I just got enough force together to loosen her grip and knock her hands free from my head. I started raining blows upon her face and just let fly every bit of anger, rage, and even a bit of fear that I'd built up over the course of our confrontation. My fist kept connecting against her skull, and blood kept flying out, and while she kept trying to dodge and hold back my assault, she didn't stand a chance. I felt my fists crush the bones in her face as her skull began to disintegrate under me. I had her pinned against a table, and she had nowhere to run and couldn't fly. This thing was at my mercy, and today was not a day to expect mercy from someone you just tried to murder. I hit her until there was nothing left of her head and left the body to hit the floor in a bloody pile after what seemed like forever. I left the body in a disgusting heap of meat in a corner and retrieved my weapons. Wait, gotta make sure, and it's probably overkill. I grabbed one of the UV grenades I had left and put it inside what remained of her torso and pulled the pin and quickly left the room. Boom! Cool kids don't look back at explosions. Now I can add that to my list of cool action movie things I've done and I will never tell anyone about because they'll never believe me. Nope. Keep walking. Emerging outside in the cold October rain was refreshing as it not only washed off the blood and gore of the last encounter, but was oddly refreshing too. I stood outside in the rain and just let the adrenaline of the melee wash over me. I needed to relax, but too bad, I don't smoke anymore. Finally, the combat rush was over and my breathing returned to normal. This was going to be a problem and probably one that a single troubleshooter won't be able to handle on her own. I'm going to need help and there's probably no way around this. You call for help in a situation like this and it's going one of two ways. You're either overreacting and it's fine or end up with a situation like Boston. And it's one step away from calling in the proverbial airstrike and a room of old white dudes looking for a reason to enact the Cradle of Liberty protocol. Cradle of Liberty was basically the nuclear option for all threats, super and paranormal, and had only ever been deployed once since the 70s. You used it when you had absolutely zero choice and collateral damage wasn't a primary concern. Survival was, and the cost would be paid and it didn't matter how it was accomplished. No one alive today would talk about what it would entail, but we all knew that it was the last possible option and no one wanted to be the one to sanction its use. I thought I had it figured out and this was not a vampire nest, but instead some new undead douche. Being greedy, it seems that I may be wrong if the last encounter was any indication of what's going on. Super vampires are on the loose and this town is ground zero or something much, much worse is on the horizon. I don't like what I'm seeing here and something is definitely not adding up like it should. I'm pretty fucking terrible at math, but I sure as shit know that 2 + 2 ain't 10. I don't like this. Remember why you're doing this, Quinn. 2 weeks paid vacation. Oh yeah, and saving the world or some shit. I made a call, first to Rianne, and let her know that I was probably in over my pretty little head. I wasn't too thrilled to call the feds, but they'd have a solution, and at least Rianne was a calming influence. She always knew what to say to talk me down off the ledge, and it didn't hurt that she sounded cute when she was concerned about me. I miss her. The second call was a little harder to make. I called the department, which is code for the Department of Paranormal Resources, a subset of the Department of Defense and Homeland Security. Layers upon layers upon layers of bureaucracy, but also they had resources and people that your average gifted or troubleshooter didn't have access to. I was told to sit tight and hold my position while they assessed the situation and confer with partners within paranormal research and defense. Great, I get to cool my jets in the middle of Vampire City. I got lucky and a cleanup crew was at the Hope Springs coroner office within an hour, and Percy Downer was offered a generous payout for his silence and a 2-week vacation. Must be nice. Though odds are he'll be sent to Langley for an extensive debrief and probably psychic mind probe to see if he knows more than what he's letting on. Guy like that is probably next level boring. Then again, I didn't expect to fight a retirement home in a morgue, so who knows. Enjoy Virginia. I drove away from the coroner's office and pulled up in a nearby hotel and booked a room. It had only been a few hours since the confrontation and my mind wasn't ready to let go of what happened. The thing that bothered me the most is how quickly those things moved and how quickly they reanimated into their new unlife. The real question that bothered me is, why didn't this happen before with the other victims? Why was this happening now? There has to be a reason for it. Was there a new vampire lord attempting to make a nest in this town? How does the superpowered angle figure into it? Was someone, or worse, something, creating a vampire super hybrid? What in the hell was happening in Hope Springs, New York? I laid down in the hotel's uncomfortable bed and put my head down on the pillow and felt every bump and bruise from today's encounter. My wounds would heal by morning, but still, that old lady tossed me around pretty good, and if I hadn't gotten a lucky break, I'm sure she'd be picking me out of her fangs right now. I could have died today. I got lucky. Or I got sloppy. Drifting off to a strange and unusual sleep, I passed out and had nightmares all night. The following morning, I was awakened by my phone ringing off the hook and about 30 missed calls. I tried to get my eyes to focus on the tiny screen and see who had called. It was Rianne. I called her back and immediately I knew something was wrong from the second she answered the other line. "Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to call you all night. Are you okay? Are you all right? What the hell happened to you?" I tried to sound cool and brave, but I get the feeling she wasn't in the mood for my particular brand of humor. Well, I went to the morgue to see a corpse and got jumped by 3 of them instead. She exhaled loudly. I could tell it was a mix between frustration and relief. "Are you okay, Quinn? Talk to me." Rianne's voice had this thing in it that made you want to confess what you were really feeling, especially when you didn't want to. Honestly, no, I'm not. Something is pretty fucked up here in upstate New York. One of those things almost got the best of me. I've never fought anything like them before. Something is very, very wrong here. Caroline, if I'd known, I would have never sent you there in the first place. She was sorry beyond words, and part of me could hear that she was on the verge of crying, almost like I could feel her lip tremble on the phone. I know you had no clue. I'm waiting on the call from the department on what we're going to do next. I don't have a good feeling about this. I'm legitimately worried what this could all mean. On one hand, I had always quietly suspected that the paranormal war was escalating on some level. I was living proof that hybrids of some type were possible, even if we don't know exactly what I was. There were other troubleshooters who were a mix of paranormal and superpowered, but were remarkably few in numbers, like less than 50 identified across the entirety of North America. I should let you rest, but Caroline, you be careful out there. I know you think you're invincible and like nothing can hurt you, but you're human like the rest of us. Know when to run, okay? She said I was human. There are days I wish I was. I'm not human. I don't know what I am, honestly. I will. Look, when I get back to the city, why don't we get together and maybe get dinner and a movie like old times? I'd like that. I'll talk to you soon, Quinn. She paused for a second, and I could tell she stopped herself from saying something more before she hung up the phone. I love you too. I sat in the hotel room and stared at the peeling wallpaper and was just alone with my thoughts. What am I going to do? How am I going to do it? I finally asked myself the hard question of the day. How many people are going to die? The phone rang. Again. I wanted it to be Rianne and for her to talk me out of this assignment and to come back to New York and for her to convince me to leave this world behind and run. It wasn't Rianne. It was the department, and it was the secured line that you never wanted to call you directly. Director James Carlson, Department of Paranormal Resources, the guy whose desk issues the orders, and the guy who could sign your death warrant, should the need arise. This was about to turn my Halloween into a fucking horror show. Agent Quinn, the situation has changed. We're preparing to activate the Cradle of Liberty protocol in the city of Hope Springs. Assets will be on the scene within the next hour. My orders, sir? Megaton and FaZe will be on scene, and the Hammer and Carpenter teams will support them. You coordinate with the other gifted on scene. I want that nest burned to the ground. Burn the city to the ground if you have to. Sir, what about the civilians? Like I said, the situation has changed. Consider all civilians as hostile. What in the fuck did he just say? Were they really going to activate the Cradle of Liberty protocol? What the hell did they even mean? The line went dead and a text message appeared with a set of coordinates and a timestamp of 1 hour. Oh fuck, this was it, wasn't it? The paranormal war just escalated. An hour later, I was at the arranged meeting place and the air was grim. It was a small farmhouse that had been requisitioned for use as a staging area. Soldiers, heavy equipment, and helicopters, and the supers showed up. Before the world changed 50 years ago, superheroes wore colorful costumes and capes and were larger than life and existed purely as fiction. Now, in the time of Kevlar, synthetic fabrics and utility ruled the day, and it was less tights and spandex and more tactical gear with a few colorful adornments. A few of the more outlandish supers wore stuff that people only wore at Halloween, but most were modest about their abilities. It should be noted that very few people can successfully pull off wearing a cape and actually have it look cool. A group of about 12 of us stood by the barn and watched as a man descended from the sky with a purple cape billowing behind him very dramatically. Megaton always knew he had to make an entrance and always made sure that you knew he was on the scene and that he was the best and brightest of all the gifted world. I didn't care for him, but I couldn't deny how powerful he was. Strong, tougher than me, and a unique ability to repel the force used against him. Oh, and he could also fly. A shimmering red light beside him as Megaton landed, and from a glowing red portal stepped FaZe, the woman known as FaZe, whose gifts allowed her limited teleportation and energy manipulation. She was a real showstopper, but young and often reckless when she was in combat against paranormal threats. The supers were fine fighting against other gifted and villains like Hurricane and Dread, but paranormal entities were a different breed. The last super to arrive pulled up on a tricked-out motorcycle. He was a combat expert known as mnemonic. His ability was to learn in a new, instantaneous manner, and he used his abilities to learn all sorts of martial arts and weaponry. He was a show-off, but let me tell you, he was the best shot, likely, on the entire planet Earth. Well, all of us were here now, and it was time to get to work. The team leader for Hammer and Carpenter squads stepped forward. Typical military bravado and swagger that depended on superior firepower and overwhelming numbers. Trust me, I've seen this movie before and it never ends well for the guys with the guns. But this is the hand we've been dealt. Captain Tony King and Lieutenant Tanya Dante. They nicknamed these two TNT, and for good reason. A lot of shit tended to blow up in their presence. Okay, we have a good actionable intelligence, and we're going to act on it immediately. Hope Springs Retirement Community is a vampire nest and is about to be as infested as a place can get. Think of a goddamn cockroach infestation, and you've got a pretty good idea of what we're up against. We do have an advantage. The vamps are new, inexperienced, and still not used to their powers. This means the new staff from the Pentagon should make short work of them. Our significant threat has been identified as a new hybrid-type vampire lord. We believe it to be an individual named Terry Fisher. We know how strong they can be, but this new lord seems to only be recruiting from the weak and feeble, so not exactly fighting the Russians or the North Koreans here," Dante said matter-of-factly as she laid out the information for all of us. Captain King stepped forward and pointed to the group of about 12 soldiers behind him and gestured toward their weapons. "We have state-of-the-art firepower and enough ammunition to shoot at anything that moves. We have enhanced fire support in terms of a troubleshooter and their superpowered allies. There is no reason we can't wrap this up by morning and be home for breakfast. I'd like to go get a grand slam at Denny's afterwards, so who's with me?" I sighed. I was surrounded by overconfidence and itchy trigger fingers and show-offs with superpowers. Is it too late to go work at Applebee's? I looked at the assembled superpowered individuals and approached them and tried to be as friendly as I could. I worked with Megaton and FaZe before in Boston, but I'd never worked with Mnemonic. I don't like going into a combat situation with people I don't trust, and especially people who had declined to help when their country needed them. I told them what happened this morning at the morgue, and they laughed at me. They wanted to know how the great Agent Caroline Quinn could get her ass kicked by an old man and a few ladies from bingo. I told them to take this seriously. This wasn't your usual bloodsucker. They didn't want to hear it. They laughed it off and said it would be easy. I remember how Boston happened, and Megaton and FaZe should have too. King and Dante barked orders across the staging area for everyone to get ready as we were wheels up in 5 minutes and got on board of the choppers. I went and got my gear loaded up, an enhanced protective vest, my trusty Baby Jane, and a few of the UV grenades. I guess we were as ready as we were gonna be. This was gonna be bad, wasn't it?
More scares to come. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
As the helicopters flew over Hope Springs, it was kind of pretty, in a sense. It was Halloween night and trick-or-treaters could be seen walking down the streets with their parents or friends. This town had no idea what was happening in it. You could almost feel the sense of fun and joy that people were having. I wish I didn't have to bring hell to this little place, but it can't be helped. The 2 aircraft cut through the night sky and headed towards the retirement home, and presumably where this was going to end. I glanced out the side door and saw Megaton keeping pace with us. Megaton still had that stupid, overconfident smile on his face. One of the things I learned very early on in my career was never underestimate your enemy, no matter how weak they appear. An enemy is most dangerous when they are cornered and especially when they're on their own turf. We started to begin our descent onto the lawn of the retirement home, which was a 2-story structure that looked like it was built fairly recently. It looked super modern and almost out of place for a town that looks like it was taken out of a postcard advertising for rural charm. Captain King slid the side door open of the helicopter and looked back at all of us in his command and patted his weapon. "Okay, kids, it's time to visit Grandpa." He cheered as he pulled down his night vision goggles above his eyes. No sooner did the words leave his mouth, things began to go immediately wrong. King was yanked out of the door and thrown screaming towards the ground by an unseen assailant. Everyone couldn't comprehend what just happened to the Hammer Squad commander, and everyone's jaw was just hanging open. Panic was not unlike fire. When panic spreads uncontrolled, it spreads fast, just like a forest blaze. Suddenly, without warning, the helicopter lurched forward and pitched itself towards the ground in an out-of-control spiral. Soldiers fell out of the open hatch door and tumbled to their deaths. You are not surviving that kind of a fall with that kind of force. I held on to my seat as best I could and tried to unlatch my safety harness. I needed out, fast. We smashed into the ground hard, and glass and metal flew everywhere as the helicopter split apart from the impact. Fire and small explosions happened all around us as we skidded across the lawn and finally came to a stop when we hit the entranceway of the structure. My safety harness and enhanced durability probably kept me alive. Probably. Everyone else was not so lucky. The other soldiers who were still in their seats did not survive the crash. One of them seemed to have caught shrapnel to the face and neck. The other had her neck snapped by the force of the crash, and another soldier whose face I couldn't see had been messily disemboweled by a piece of debris. I could hear the other craft land safely, and then I heard the sounds of gunfire outside, and people screaming. Time to go! I escaped my harness and the wreckage of the crash and pushed my way out of the shattered helicopter. The others had landed safely, but it didn't matter as they were completely surrounded by flying creatures and they weren't shooting with any precision. They were shooting wildly and without thinking except to empty their magazines at anything that moved. If you can believe it, this is where things went from bad to worse. Tanya Dante stood back to back with Mnemonic in an attempt to keep some sense of combat awareness. The pair at least were shooting with purpose and even hitting a few of the creatures in the air and potentially even killing a few, but I couldn't be sure from all the muzzle flashes. Fall back, goddammit! Dante yelled at anyone who would listen. No sooner did she yell that something swooped out of the sky and picked her up by her shoulders and carried her into the air. The lieutenant wasn't going down without a fight, though, as she kept firing her weapon as she ascended into the sky with her captor. The monster used its tremendous strength to throw her against a second-story building wall with enough force to shatter concrete. Mnemonic looked at me in utter terror and started to run away from the fight. He didn't make it 50 feet before he was swarmed. The creatures tore the poor hero to pieces within seconds, and fountains of blood spewed from what remained of his body. "That's enough!" A powerful voice echoed across the battlefield, and for a second, everyone stopped fighting and shooting, and all eyes focused in that direction. A person in medical scrubs emerged from behind the crashed helicopter near the entrance and started walking towards the center of all of us. The shimmering light distortion appeared beside this new stranger, and FaZe stepped out and started to engage in hand-to-hand combat with his new enemy. She started kicking and punching, with her attacks enhanced with her bioelectric energy, and while spectacular looking, it didn't seem to hurt this person at all. They just kept walking towards the middle of the battleground. They kept walking towards me. "Stand still, fucker!" FaZe yelled as she kept up, but none of her attacks seemed to affect them. Finally, enough light was present that I could get a good look at this person in the scrubs. It was a man in his early 20s, or maybe mid-20s at most. He walked with a stride and purpose that someone who knows they're untouchable does. FaZe stood in front of him and cupped her hands together and thrust them forward and hurled a huge bolt of blue crackling lightning. The discharge filled the air with so much power that I could feel my hair pick up on a static charge. The man kept walking past FaZe and towards me. "I said stop!" FaZe teleported right in front of him and attempted to stand in his way. And just as she rematerialized, the man grabbed her by the throat. "No!" The man snapped her neck and tossed her lifeless body to the ground with a wet smack. Megaton chose his moment to dive bomb the man from somewhere high above and create a huge impact crater. The two struggled and exchanged blows while entangled in each other's limbs. Okay, maybe this will make a difference. Maybe this is the edge we need. Megaton grabbed hold of the man and flew straight up into the sky out of sight, and for a moment, everyone stopped again, absolutely transfixed by what happened. Vampire and soldier alike just stood there and waited. You could hear a thunderous clash of blows above us, high in the clouds, and it echoed so loudly that the remaining glass near us vibrated and threatened to shatter. Megaton had this guy on the ropes. America, fuck yeah! Take that, Dracula! Then, silence. Thud! A body hit the ground with such impact that it exploded and coated everything nearby in a shower of blood and gore. The gentle flapping of leather wings carried upon the night wind. The man in the scrubs had transformed into his monstrous and vicious vampire lord form. In his left hand, he held what was left of Megaton's head. He smiled as he held it and looked at me as he took a bite out of Megaton's face and chewed on his flesh. "Finish the others off. Leave this one to me," he quietly whispered, and no sooner did those words leave his ashen gray lips than the other soldiers fell silent as they too joined their friends as killed in action. "This is it, Caroline Quinn. This is where you die. Rianne, I'm sorry I wasn't better to you." The menacing vampire lord flew right down in front of me and stood up to his full hulking height and towered above me. Jesus, this guy was huge. We share the same blood, you and I. We're the next step in ascending what humanity can be. We are better than the cattle around us. Great. Not only am I going to die here, but I have to listen to this dickhead monologue before he kills me. Or something worse. Think. Okay, maybe that'll work. A piece of the shredded helicopter, about as long as a baseball bat and sharp as hell, I can probably reach it, if I can keep this idiot talking and inching me backwards. How are we alike, exactly? I'm not exactly feeling the whole undead vibe or looking like something from a horror movie. Keep him talking. I've known about others like you for a long time. You aren't as special as you think. You're what was created long ago by those who helped us escape the confinements of the void. Okay, I have no fucking clue what this guy is talking about. I know who I am, and more or less where I came from. Right? I slowly back up and keep my eye on a piece of shrapnel I'm hoping to turn into a weapon. Void, huh? Sounds like a nightclub. Your attempts at delaying your fate are amusing, but it stops here. Join others like yourself and take your place at the unholy throne, at the head of humanity. Turn this diseased world into a paradise for those wronged by that from above. I am not getting into a religious debate with this goddamn monster. I stop, and I can feel my hand touch the hot steel of the shrapnel. You know what? I'm good. I grab the piece of metal like a sword and absolutely throw all of my momentum into a forward swing at this thing's head. It blocks the strike with its clawed hand. Oh shit. It gets a solid grip on my left arm and breaks it at the wrist and throws me aside roughly. I tumble toward the helicopter near the entranceway and skid right into the doorframe. The vampire lord continues advancing towards me. Okay, that didn't work. I quickly assessed my situation, and I got one last Hail Mary, as it were. Just inside the wreckage is one of the helicopter-mounted weapons, and it looks relatively intact despite its crash. The barrel appears to be fine, and it seems spooled up to the magazine. I start crawling my way inside the crash and try my best not to get burned by the dying fires. You chose to hide like a coward rather than live as a god among mortals? Okay, it's time to shut the fuck up. I pull myself forward and aim the mounted minigun out the ruined door and squeeze the triggers on both sides of the weapon. It hums to life with an electric whirl as it begins to spin its rotating barrels. This minigun fires more of the enhanced ammo, except it's 7.62, which means that our vampire lord friend pretty much liquefies when I hit him with hundreds of rounds, if not thousands of rounds per minute. He doesn't even have a chance to look surprised before I completely turn him into paste. There isn't much left of him besides a pair of shoes, and I'm totally okay with that. Silence fills the air once again as soon as I stop firing, and the barrels wind down as the electric motor disengages. I won. I take myself outside of the ruined chopper and back outside into the night once again. I stand up and cradle my broken wrist and notice a distinct lack of undead in my immediate area. I fiddle inside my vest and look for my phone and call in to Director Carlson. Agent Quinn here. Operation a success. Vampire Lord eliminated. The other vampires escaped. My team is gone. Everyone is gone. Megaton, Phase, Mnemonic. Everyone except me. This wasn't a success. Not by a long shot. Understood. Beginning Cradle of Liberty protocol. Your country thanks you for your service, Agent Quinn. Wait, what? Total elimination of the target zone in 15 minutes. Goodbye, Agent Quinn. The line went dead, and so did every light in the city, and it was darkness, and the sound of something sinister in the evening air. This was not my idea of a Halloween prank. This is definitely not a treat. This had to be a trick, right? This was not worth 2 weeks of vacation. Will Caroline Quinn survive? And what would be left of her? Well, you might find out if you stick around here at Weekly Spooky, so make sure you click subscribe. You don't want to miss what's coming in the near future. And we have a whole lot of interesting stuff planned for November and especially December. Cryptmas is all about holiday fear, and we'll make sure to bring it in spades if you stick around with us. It's been very special to have so many people tune in to Weekly Spooky. I know I keep mentioning be subscribed, but it's the truth because so many of you have joined us for the first time, and we hope you'll stick around and enjoy what we cook up all year long. We've done over 200 episodes, and I really have no intention of stopping. So as long as you're out there listening, well, then I can't stop and I won't stop. And if you want to support us in a very direct way because you just can't get enough of the spooky, why not head to weeklyspooky.com and click on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can guarantee that the spooky is always coming on the weekly. And speaking of which, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names at the end of the show. And they are Johnny Nix, Bobbletopia.com, Megan Hua, Julia Kirsch, Brent McCullough, Steve King, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much. And if you want to join that list, head over to weeklyspooky.com, click on Patreon, and select any tier at $15 a month or higher. It really does help a lot. Podcasting is a tough gig sometimes, and having an audience behind you is literally everything. Well, that and having a literal army of incredibly talented authors. And if you want to submit a story, send it to weeklyspooky@gmail.com. You never know. We might just air it. But now I've got to get out of here and get ready for the next show. So for myself, for my producer Dan Wilder, for my executive producers Joshua Butler and Rob Fields, and my composer Ray Mattis, I'll talk at you tomorrow.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.